Well, Democratic Alliance Leader John Steenhuisen is delivering a speech on the electricity crisis and how to tackle Eskom's challenges. Let's take you live there now.
By the President to take over the implementation of his plan. They have made no progress at all, and they should be taken off the job right away. But what we cannot then do is replace them with another set of ANC politicians. We cannot keep repeating the same actions and then hoping for some different outcome. This crisis calls for outside industry experts to now take over and lead the way. What we are proposing today is that the President immediately dissolve the National Energy Crisis Committee and appoint in its place an outside industry expert to oversee the implementation of the Energy Response Plan. It is critical that this person is both apolitical and a leading expert in the energy field, and that he or she is sufficiently empowered to do whatever it takes to stabilize our current generation fleet and bring additional generation on board without having their hands tied by the red tape that has held our recovery back until now. This will require the executive authority to assemble a team of experts, the authority to oversee the hiring of engineers and managers without having to answer to the racial bean counters in any ANC ministry, and the executive power to make decisions on the procurement of additional electricity from independent producers, free from the stifling regulations imposed by the likes of Minister Mantashe and Minister Patel, who is still today insisting on 35% localization for bid window 5, clearly oblivious to the fact that we are sitting with a national catastrophe. This approach is perfectly in line with the whole of society approach to fixing our country's many problems. And this electricity crisis must now be a wake-up call to government that expert outside help is now the only way forward. It is abundantly clear that the Energy Response Plan is dead in the water in the hands of the President's Crisis Committee, because it's become the scene of a political turf war between ministers and ministries. It is essentially a good plan, but both Minister Mantashe and Minister Gordhan should be kept as far away from its implementation as possible. But not only these two ministers and the Crisis Committee. The President himself must now hand over the plan to someone who can and will see to it that progress is made. The reality is that President Ramaphosa has, in some way or another, been in charge of overseeing Eskom's recovery and the stabilization of our electricity supply for the past 12 years. First, during his time as Deputy President, when he was tasked with overseeing the turnaround of state-owned enterprises, followed by the past 4 years and a half as President. In 2015, he famously promised us all that in another 18 months we'd forget that these electricity challenges have ever happened. Since then, he has not stopped telling us, in SONA after SONA, how much progress has been made and how much Eskom has been put on a path to recovery. We now know that none of this is true. In fact, our energy situation has regressed substantially, and Eskom today has never been worse off. During his term as President, we've been told about 9-point plans and 7-point reforms and now the latest 5-point energy response plan. And yet nothing of this has materialized. Since he has become President, South Africa has shed 4,136 gigawatts of electricity. And this past weekend, we were down to half our generation capacity. President Ramaphosa has had his hands on the wheel for over a decade. And in that time, our energy situation has deteriorated sharply. He now needs to face the sober reality that neither he nor his ministers are actually capable of solving this predicament. They have completely lost control, and our country is now spiraling into a disaster. Now, when you are clearly out of your depth, no one will blame you for calling in expert help. In fact, they will applaud it. And that is the only way out of this crisis. But in addition to appointing this outside expert, whose sole and single-minded focus must be the recovery of our electricity supply, there are a number of additional steps which the DA has already called for on numerous occasions that still need to be put in place. If these had been heeded and implemented years ago, we would not be sitting in the crisis that we're sitting in today. The first of these is the immediate declaration of a ring-fenced state of disaster around Eskom and our electricity supply. This will allow for the circumvention of the current stifling web of legislation that prevents the acquisition of additional power from independent power producers. The second is the firing of Minister Mantashe. It is incomprehensible that he has managed to remain in this crucial position despite these multiple failures. He, not Eskom, is responsible for the dysfunctional regulatory framework that has prevented our energy sector's recovery. He has repeatedly blocked renewable energy projects. He has allowed the risk mitigation power producer procurement program to stall in the middle of this crisis. And he just cannot see beyond coal. He must go, and he must go now. Then there's the establishment of an ad hoc committee into the energy crisis. Parliament cannot sit back and just be a casual spectator at a time of crisis like this. We need to give Parliament back its teeth and allow it to play the oversight role envisaged by the authors of our Constitution. Parliament should be sitting round the clock, coming up with ways to mitigate against this crisis. For too many years, this ANC government and its presidents were allowed to defang Parliament and turn it into a rubber stamp of ANC policies and programs. That has to end now. What is also required is a comprehensive and publicly available mitigation plan in the event of an ongoing high-stage load shedding. What many people don't realize is that our energy crisis reaches much further than just the lights and appliances in our houses. In towns and cities across the country, the knock-on effect of these extended blackouts will lead to a series of secondary crises that will threaten the lives and livelihoods of our citizens. From sewage pumps and cell towers to schools and medical services, communities rely on services that require dependable electricity. I'm very proud to say that the Western Cape government, through its provincial disaster management team, has just announced a detailed plan to deal with the worst-case load-shedding scenarios. The purpose of this plan is to ensure that critical services remain operational even if high-stage load-shedding were to continue. I encourage President Ramaphosa to study this plan because I believe that there are many aspects of it that be rolled out across the country. South Africans need to know that someone has thought of and planned for every eventuality. At the moment, they sit literally in the dark. And finally, we need to see timelines and firm deliverables set to the energy response plan. Because left open-ended as it currently is, nothing will happen and no one will be held accountable. If the President heeds our call and appoints an outside expert to head up this recovery, then their first task must be to set out clear targets and clear timelines and to share those with the public. This person will also have to facilitate a working relationship, a partnership even, between Eskom, independent power producers and local governments. Because certainly for the foreseeable immediate future, Eskom is still going to be central to our recovery. And it's critical that rather than being scapegoated for the failed politicians and failed policies, that they are given the support that they need. I have no doubt that such an industry expert would concur with most, if not all, of the DA's many recommended interventions to fix this electricity crisis. These include immediate interventions, such as the waiving of preferential procurement requirements, the waiving of the local content requirements, and the removal of onerous BE requirements so that South Africans can benefit from only the cheapest and fastest way out of this mess. It also includes incentivizing small-scale systems such as rooftop solar by easing the regulatory burden to make it easier and cheaper for homeowners and businesses to install their own generation capacity. Then there are the medium-term interventions, such as enabling municipalities to procure their own power by issuing a blanket Section 34 determination that will allow them to buy, generate, distribute, sell and store electricity, or compelling NERSA to speed up its regulatory approach so that generation projects can be approved quicker. There are the long-term interventions, such as the long overdue review of the country's integrated resource plan, expediting outstanding IPP bid windows, and encouraging private-public partnerships in infrastructure development. Now, none of these things are radical or contentious. They're just good old common sense. But they do require a government that can see past its own desire to cling to power and control. The time for ideology is over. It's now time to deliver. This crisis has to be a wake-up call for President Ramaphosa and his government. A sign that when it comes to keeping the lights on, they are now out of their depth and their command and control approach to government belongs firmly on the scrap heap of history. If we want to move forward as a nation, then we have to be forward-thinking in everything that we do, and particularly when it comes to tackling this energy crisis. Finally, I wish to assure the residents of the country that I will be liaising with DA governments and our coalition partners around the country to ensure that they are doing everything possible to shield citizens from the ongoing failures of national government. It's time now for radical action. It's time now for delivery. The time for promises and talk shops is over. We're calling on President Ramaphosa to heed what we've said today, to take it seriously, to appoint an outside expert to lead the fight to get us out of this crisis. Failure to do so will mean more load shedding, more blackouts, more job losses, more suffering and more poverty. And South Africans will never forgive you for that. Thank you.
Well, that was the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, giving the nation an address there on what he thinks we should be doing about the power crisis.